at ya, at ya. Tell you what's master, coming at ya, coming at ya. Rhyme style disaster, coming at ya, at ya. Tell you what's master, coming at ya.
All right, welcome to another scintillating episode of Cut the Bull. I am obviously Wilfred Reilly, along with my co-hosts Christy Kelly and Brooks Crenshaw. Feel free to take a bow or wave or something. And tonight we're talking to Jesse Petrilla, if I have that correct, the author of If It Takes 1,000 Years, one of the better books I've read about conflict between the West and the Arab or the Islamic world. So I guess as an opening intro question, Jesse, can you tell the audience a little bit about the book? What's going on in this volume?
Sure. Well, it took me about 20 years to write. Didn't take 1,000 years, but it felt like it. And I started out, like most Americans, pretty naive about our jihadist enemies. And on 9/11, I was 18 years old. And that was really the first enemy that I knew as an adult. And I set out on my own jihad to find out what makes these people tick, what would make somebody want to do that. And every peel of the onion that I peeled back, I found more sinister elements of the jihadist threat. And it was most frightening when I realized just how long-term these guys are in the game for. That the title of the book comes from words that were spoken to me by a Taliban commander when I went to Afghanistan about a decade later in 2012, where I told him, "Hey, we've got you caught. Well, what are you doing? Why do you keep fighting us? How long are you going to keep this up for?" And he said, "My children will fight you. Their children will fight you. If it takes 1,000 years, we will win." And so, although it didn't take 1,000 years for them to kick us out of Afghanistan, it's just one battle in the global war that is the global jihad.
Yeah, and I mean, thanks for your service. I wasn't a military guy, but so if you don't mind describing, what did you do in how did you come to be interrogating or interviewing the one of the commanders of the Taliban? That was one of the more interesting parts of the book. What's the cycle where you join up and then that becomes the reality?
So it was funny. I was a tanker in the army, actually, in training, and so I was combat arms, ready to fight and kill the jihadists. And then I started volunteering for deployments, and this was right at the drawdown of what they called the surge in Afghanistan. So deployments would pop up, I would raise my hand, and then they would get canceled. And so this was about probably the fourth or fifth one that I volunteered for, and it was a strange thing that I got a call from the guy that was sending people overseas, and he said, "Hey, I've got a kind of a funky one. It says personal representative is the title, was the title of the initial deployment." I was like, "Personal representative, what does that mean?" And here I was, having spent the previous decade fighting the jihadists on the ideological level, and grassroots protests, all kinds of stuff that I'm sure you read about in the book. But then he said, "You're going to be the personal representative to the Taliban. You'll essentially be their public defender at these trials that they set up." And he said, "But don't worry, when you get on the ground, you could always shift into other positions." And so I got there, and for the first couple of weeks, it was so hilarious. Out of all the people in the entire world, that I was the guy that was making sure they weren't tortured and making sure they had enough to eat and that kind of stuff. But they set up these mock trials that were really, I mean, it was really for show, because we'd always keep them. But it was funny because it would get to my section, where they would go through all the prosecutors were actual JAG attorneys, and here all the personal representatives were combat arms guys, infantry and tankers. And they would get to me after this. The prosecutor would lay on this long case. They would say, "Does the personal representative wish to put up any defense or have anything to add?" And I got notorious for those first couple of weeks. I would stand up and always say, "I have nothing to add," and then I would sit back down. And so what happened then, the major who was in charge came over to me and said, "Hey, how would you like to go over to the other side and help with the prosecutions? We need a liaison officer that's going to help the Afghans with their prosecutions." And as we would turn over the Taliban to the Afghan authorities that were captured, they would then do their own trials and their own interrogations. And so my job from there out pretty much was to, for the majority of my deployment, was facilitating the interrogations of the Taliban. So I had, and Al Qaeda and other captured Haqqani, other jihadist groups. And so I had an all access badge to the detention facility in Parwan there in Afghanistan, which it was nicknamed Gitmo's evil twin. So it was the prison there, and I took full advantage of it. I mean, I was with the Taliban for 8 or 10 hours a day, drinking tea with them, chatting with them, just getting to know them. And it was really just such an eye-opening experience to pick their brains. And those 6 months on the ground, whether it was talking to the Taliban directly or other jihadists, or reading through their files, because a lot of it, one of the teams I was working with, I would have to go through and redact their files, all the evidence that they had against them, and then transfer that to the Afghans to help with their interrogations and their investigation. So the stuff that I would read about, these things that they would do, would be just some of the most sinister elements. One guy poisoned a girl's school. Another one was some executioner. Another was a Taliban judge that would deem somebody did something against Sharia and Islamic law and sentence him to death. And then I would meet these people, and it was from the way that they felt talking to them, and what was on the paper and what was hard evidence of what they did. It's not like these were the wrong guys that we got. These had so many levels of elements that we would verify that this is the guy, that it's beyond a shadow of doubt that these were the terrorists. And I would talk to them. They would be so warm and friendly, and just totally this just evil that's another level. If you walk into Pelican Bay or San Quentin or one of the other prisons in America, these guys are not going to be warm and fuzzy, and they're criminals. That just shows this is not a criminal element. And so I would be talking to these people for months, and if I didn't know better, I mean, I would think they're my friend. They would be happy. They'd say, "Hello, Mr. Jesse, how are you?" Just so warm and deceiving, to the point where they when they operate in the West, successfully dupe an awful lot of people, including our politicians, our voters, students on college campuses. I mean, there's so many people throughout the world that these jihadists interact with, and they get all these useful idiots behind them that don't know any better. Because in the West, we do live in a Judeo-Christian culture, whether or not we're Christian or not, and we are surrounded by those values. That's our society, the values of life and loving one another and that sort of thing. Even though we have our own squabbles, it's nothing like in other parts of the world. And so when they come to us, naive people want to put our mindset on them. And it's such a dangerous thing to do, because they're just totally taking advantage of our way of life, and they're coming in. And you look at the Dutch as the perfect example. They're getting overrun right now because they had such an open, warm value in their culture that they let everybody in, and they tolerated the intolerant, and now they're getting overrun and their culture is getting destroyed. So
that's actually, I think, a great break point there, where you say they tolerated the intolerant. I mean, I'm going to make one very quick comment. Then I want to hear what Brooks has to say, then Christy, because Brooks obviously also have a military background. But one thing that's kind of interesting, when you talk about going to jail or to prison, you meet just these sociopathic scumbags. They're obviously criminals. In my limited experience, both coming from a slum neighborhood and becoming pretty successful as I started life, and in training as a lawyer and meeting clients, what you're describing is even true for people that are at the top of the hierarchy for actual major gangs based in foreign countries, for example. And it's certainly true of the few people I've met who were soldiers for other societies that don't like the USA. They don't view themselves as criminals. Even a cartel sicario wouldn't, but certainly I would assume an Iraqi Republican guardsman. They view themselves as fighters for another way. So, I mean, I could see someone in an Islamic militant movement saying, well, we perhaps treat women badly, but you have 1 million abortions a year in your society, and 2% of people are on OnlyFans. That doesn't justify their worst perspective. But yeah, there would be enemies, as opposed to prey, criminal scum, something like that. That doesn't mean you should let your enemies into your society, though, which I think is what Europe is about to learn when you look at criminal patterns and so on. But Brooks, what do you think about this? How does this gel with your own experiences as a military man? What are your thoughts on what Jesse said so far?
No, yeah, we have a significant overlap in our experience, and I've experienced the same thing. I was a human intelligence guy for Naval Special Warfare, so I spent a significant amount of time in the booth, and not as much as you. I've probably interrogated, or I wasn't even the interrogator. I was the human guy that was the other guy in the booth with the interrogator, and we probably did 100 to 200. Um, Occasionally, you get the honest one that's like, "Yeah, I would kill you. I would kill you and your family." But yeah, a lot of what we got was, even detainees in the booth were, warm and docile. But by then, the game was, if they didn't have any physical evidence on the target, they've got maybe 2 weeks, maybe four at the most, and then they're back out into society. So that was something that, it sounded like, Jesse, you were in 2012, things were very police oriented, judicial oriented. We experienced that in Iraq in like the 2010, where we had to get warrants and go through Iraqi judges. And, it's the painful process of trying to hand it over to a bunch of people that are going to let it absolutely fall apart. One of the things that you touched on is just the long game. Of course, the title of your book. What most people don't realize, in my experience, and I had a university experience that always comes to mind when we're having this conversation. And this was, white kid from, middle America, and I were having a conversation about Islam, and I said something was going to be a problem, and he was like, "Oh man, that sounds intolerant." And I'm like, "You sound like you're kind of a bigot." I'm like, "Bro, what you don't understand is the number of terrorists in the population is this much. If you're talking about peeling the onion that you talked about, and then the number of supporters of the terrorist is this much. But when you go beyond that, the number of people that would kill their daughter for showing her hair, this onion continues to span out in ways that are really incompatible with the West. And, when you talk about the Dutch and you talk about Europe, the frog and the scorpion, that we will come if you will let us. And as soon as we are the majority, it's your ass. And that's what's
Or even
playing
not
out.
the majority. Once they reach a critical threshold,
Yeah.
they start to go crazy, even if they're only 15%.
Yeah, no, that's right.
Hey,
So yeah,
yeah,
no,
Christy, I've spent a lot of time in the third world, but not in a military setting, and I know nothing about this. So, as opposed to me commenting on that last comment, Christy, what do you think about this? I guess the lead would be sort of, what do you think about the idea of tolerating intolerance? But beyond that, just any comments on Jesse's point so far, or Brooks's?
Yeah, no, I have not spent time in the military. My entire family has. And my niece actually just she's a pilot and helped to evacuate Afghanistan, just a little side. But I guess the question that I had, and I did watch as preparation for this, your interview with Dennis Prager. And I will say, from someone that knows very little about this topic, I came across a little pessimistic. Like, can we win? Like, I didn't get the feeling that you were optimistic that we can win, from reading that. Now, what I did get was um, that we should be reading the book with our children so that they won't get duped. So that is definitely an area that I am, wanting to hear more about, just because, like how you said, they can be charming. And I'm wondering, as you were interrogating them and you said that he was friendly towards you, was he friendly because he didn't see you as the enemy? He saw the larger Western society, but not particularly you, or was he just really trying to dupe you in that moment?
So I think that's a very good point. They really don't look at you, the individual, as the enemy. They just want to kill all of us. So it's not personal. It's very much of a macro war that they're fighting against the West. And so when you meet a jihadist one on one, it's far less dangerous than if you meet a member of MS-13 or something like that. It's much more macro. It's much it's not like they want to
Strategic.
kill you and take your wallet or something. It's like they want to change your society, and they understand that it is a long game, and at your kids, they're not so much looking at individual grown-ups. I mean, their primary focus, they being the jihadist movement in general, and it's very fractured. There are so many jihadist groups out there that are all fighting each other, and that's one of our saving graces. If they ever got united and found a Mons Raider that united the clans north of the wall and got all the tribes together to fight against us, we would be in big trouble. But they're all fighting against each other. But like frogs being boiled, they really are focused on not just their kids but our kids as well, and you see them making tremendous success on that front in the university system, just like the communists did in the 1960s and 70s. And there's a very good book that touches on that called "Lies My Liberal Teachers Told Me." But the
Forgot to have that
Gentle
back here.
plug,
yeah.
gentle plug.
But the but they really just like socialists have done, trying to co-op our kids. These guys are trying to do the same, and so you see Iran is funding a lot of these programs that used to largely come from the peninsula, from Saudi Arabia and other peninsula nations that had wealth, where they would fund Mideast studies programs, and then Islamic nonprofits would usually move in to fill the void after those initial grants, and they would really start to just whitewash Islamic history, that sort of thing, and just open the door for more fundamentalist elements to get into our kids' minds. And so, what I think our children and particularly I think liberals in general don't understand is, and Brooks, you mentioned about how a jihadist might kill their daughter, and the number of people that support that. There's a story in my book where I met one of the Taliban that I was interviewing, and we would call them interviews. That was our politically correct term. So I would interview this guy, and you would usually start with, "Hey, tell me about your family," that sort of thing. And he said, "I have 9 kids. I had 10, but my daughter dishonored the family, so I killed her," just very nonchalantly. And I think, to Brooks's point, it goes beyond the individual and more into the global culture that the Islamist mindset has. If he hadn't killed his daughter, he would be under threat from his friends and neighbors, because he would then be looked at like, "What's wrong with you? Why didn't you kill your daughter? This is are you without honor?" And then it would just be it's this very cultural thing that's just so different than our own mind that we have, where we respect life and women, and so I think the liberals don't understand at all who they're getting in bed with. They would be the first to be strung up. I mean, I love the chickens for KFC signs that they carry around, the queers for Palestine and stuff like that, that it's like, I mean, they don't have a clue. They're clueless. And I mean, I would love to fund I don't know, we should set up a nonprofit where we get one-way tickets to Gaza and Iran and other places. Send these people that go visit. Hey, hang out, see how it turns out, and we'll fund your ticket. But it's very different. Cultures are not equal. It's a very different culture than ours, and ours is better.
And to your point,
like Brooks had a comment there, but again, the thing that keeps getting back to me is the difference between a criminal and an enemy. And in the USA, I think people tend to kind of collate those, and to some extent that's healthy. Like, you're against me, fuck you. But there really is a difference. Like, even if you met someone above the street shooter level for MS-13, they actually might be very polite and ask you sit down over pastries and talk about whatever. They'd be a working to middle class Mexican or South American guy. The problem would be that they're also working for a drug cartel that wants to smuggle poison into the country. They would have similar critiques of us. The wings of the American eagle have repressed my country for decades. I just think theirs are largely wrong. And I would assume that that's true 10x for someone who genuinely believes in traditional Shia Islam, right? I mean, they could be a very civilized, very pleasant, I assume very hospitable person, but they would also, by definition, think that if we live in this country, I mean, look at Christy with her face uncovered on this panel. Like, there would be no way we could be more than casual friends unless our society falls or theirs does. So that's just one note. I don't think most people are evil in any real sense of that term. I don't think they're
I
good
remember.
either. I think they're fun predatory monkeys. But I've never found Arabs one-on-one traveling or Latin Americans to be particularly bad people. Just there are ideologies in those societies that have a mass negative impact. Brooks, what were you going to say? You obviously had a question about
Well,
what Jesse said.
to touch on Jesse's point about, the like the Marxists, like that is a strong overlap strategically right now. And we kind of saw that play out in 2016 after Trump was elected. They had the Women's March, and Linda Sarsour is out there passing out hijabs, and all the fourth wave feminists are throwing on hijabs, and it's for guys who've been over there, it's like, what the fuck is going on here? Um, so
Ouroboros, man.
and so the same with the watermelon Marxists, green and red, with regard to Hamas and Palestine, etc. Yeah, there's an enemy of my enemy is my friend moment between two parties, one of which would absolutely destroy the other. And I think you're right, Jesse. I don't even think they even understand. I don't think they realize it. They don't know what's outside the castle walls.
That's it. They're spoiled. I mean, the big problem that I think it comes down to in the West is that we have it so affluent now, regardless of where you're at. Even the poorest places in America, you walk into those Section 8 housing, they got a roof over their head, they got food in their bellies, they got flat screen TVs. I mean, they've got cars. I mean, this is not something that resembles poverty as it does in the rest of the world, or in much of the world. And so with the affluence, there starts to be a breakdown of our dependence on one another, and people start to lose purpose. When you could sit and collect welfare and push a button and get a pizza on your, it doesn't push people to work together as they did in the levels of the Great Depression. I mean, you look at the hardest time in American history, the kids that grew up in the Depression are the ones who stormed the beaches of Normandy. They're the ones that put us on the moon. They invented television and had all these, the internet, all these different things came from that generation, really. It really started after World War II. I mean, you see them just building our interstates and working hard, and then you have hard times create strong men, and then strong men create good times create weak men. And so where are we at today? And so weak men create hard times, and they lack a purpose. So you've got these kids now that are college age, they really haven't experienced hardship. And so there's I would call it a purpose problem in America, so what they're doing, they're trying to find purpose in representing these so-called disadvantaged groups that are not the ones asking to be represented. And one of those happens to be these poor Palestinians that for whatever reason, Iran or somebody else comes in and sticks this virus in their brain and says, oh, look, let me give you the Palestinian chip, the upgrade here. They're disenfranchised people, or whatever other group, the LGBTQ, or whatever else they come up with that's supposedly marginalized. And so you have people, even if there are some legitimate elements to those issues, it's just people taking advantage of the situation. And so these kids are trying to find purpose, and they then go out and they're dyeing their hair purple and getting nose rings and trying to fit in, and then they start marching, and some paid jihadist marches through the campus with a bullhorn saying "Free, free Palestine, follow me," and then they all start marching. And it could be any other issue for that matter too, and they march along. They don't know much about the issue, they don't know much about the cause, they don't know much about the history. And this is one element that, unfortunately, I mean, you can go and protest in favor of equal rights for people, or gay rights, or whatever have you, and you're not going to necessarily march off a cliff. But this one, you're going to march off a cliff. This is something that this is the enemy. They want us dead. The jihadists want to see our constitution destroyed and replaced with Islamic Sharia law. And it is now a very dangerous purpose to be seeking, and they have no idea what they're getting into, and it's going to bite them so hard if, God forbid, these people ever do succeed.
Fair enough. Christy, well, first, obviously, any question you had
Yeah,
yourself,
I
but
did
also
have a
one question for you
question.
as a parent. How do you give kids purpose?
Let me ask my question and then I'll roll back around to that. So, my question before I forget is the argument that I'm hearing that's pulling at the heartstrings of a lot of these college-age kids is the children in the Middle East, right? The children are being starved in Palestine or, by Israel, or the children are being, murdered in mass, by indiscriminate bombs. So, what would you say to that? And then I guess as far as purpose, how do you give kids purpose? I think it has to start at a young age. So you have to, define who they are, who you want them to be, who you are kind of like as a family. Like what is your constitution as a family? What is their role? What are your expectations? Built into that, is, disappointing mom and dad. That is a thing. I mean, that helped me a lot. And then also if you are religion, also as well does a good job, I think, too. I'm sure Will argue with me about that one, but I think, religion and your belief system also helps to give kids purpose.
I
Like
actually
armor.
wouldn't argue with that. I mean, so there are two responses. One is like the trading floor asshole response, which is like, yeah, a lot of people need something to believe in because they're dumb. But I think at a deeper level, actually, no, like any guiding life philosophy is a good thing for a person. I wouldn't trust someone without a personal honor code or something like that. Religion is kind of a preset version of the personal honor code. Like instead of working out what the things are that you think are bad, like, well, there's 10 of them, right? You think you could do better than Jesus? I think that is good for the majority of people. The one comment I would make there is that I think a lot of other things like Stoicism, the old pagan code, Bushido in Japan, seem to work about equivalently well. So that to me is actually not a strong argument for God, that humans have developed 8 or 10 of these and they're all fine. But I also think there are religions like traditional Islam that are basically bad. Like that sounds pretty intolerant, but like if you're in the female 50% of the human race, you're definitely not going to benefit from that being adopted. And there are also going to be effects of that. Like last thing, but like I sometimes write about IQ. Some of the weirdest countries in the world are these long civilized places like Persia and mostly Caucasian populations, if this matters, but like tested IQ 78. Palestine's about there. And one reason that comes to my mind, I've never tested it on the ground, is that you don't educate the women. So you half the population's taking this test and getting
Mm.
a 55, and the other half's doing about normally. Is that true? Can I prove that? No, but it seems pretty logical. But,
I think
I agree with most of what you said there, actually.
humans are hardwired, I think, for worship. I think the fact that there are similar religions that are completely separate societies that were largely not in communication with one another up until fairly recently, historically speaking, and yet they develop very similar codes. I think goes to show that that we're hardwired with certain beliefs, certain tendencies, and it really, I think it's the proof that there is a God. I mean, there's no real reason why we'd be wired the way that it is to fill that void to worship something. It's there's no other than a spiritual reason. What do we need to? Why do we need to worship something? But it.
Well, if I
Uh,
could if
mhm.
if I could comment on that, there's actually a lot of writing about this. And by the way, like I'm not particularly arrogant about this. I don't think you can prove there is not a God during a podcast. Like I don't have to pull out a whiteboard or anything. I mean, there's extensive writing about like the quote unquote God gene, which Richard Dawkins talked about. His response to your first point, which is totally coherent, would just be the issue is that all the religions are completely different. So if you look at Hinduism or Aztec religion, there were things advocated like total annihilation of enemies. The Aztecs were cannibals that the Christianity would view as serious sins. A pagan or an Aztec would view Christians as unbelievably soft and weak. Like there's a lot of debate about this. You even see this online between Christians and pagans going back and forth. So there is a desire to worship, which seems to vary among different cultural and genetic populations. Why would that exist? I mean, a lot of people would argue that the belief in something beyond this world is an extremely powerful force in war. So people that don't have that belief, like Khoisan Bushmen don't, for example, have generally been pushed like far to the outskirts because there is no like make a glorious last stand for God. So I mean, like I'd recommend some of that as like almost everyone on this panel reads as sort of a nerdy sideline, like the God gene and all that stuff's genuinely interesting. But the response is that all the religions advocate things the other religions disapprove of. So last thing, because I'm a rambler, humans have a lot of traits that are natural. The question is whether they reflect something in this is probably the spiritual question. Does what you see when you meditate or pray exist in your own head or for real? And that's 50-50 great arguments on either side. But like all human society conceive of werewolves, for example. Like the animal that's so dangerous and so hard to hunt, it must be powered by your human enemies. But werewolves aren't real. So I think that's the response. Like there are things you see when you meditate or take psychedelic drugs or pray. Almost everyone identifies them with the most high, the light, I think it's healthy. Does that exist? When like if you were shot in the head, would there be something that goes on to another place? And there's a really coherent argument. The answer is no.
Well, so there's this trope always gets the question of religion often boils down to most people as a solution for where we come from and what happens after we die. And I don't view it that way. I agree with Jesse that we do have I would say, religious circuitry. And I think practically whatever you hold at the top of your value structure is technically your God, whatever that is. So people have gods. I've been writing about this a little bit, but it's kind of the overlap between Jordan Peterson and Brett Weinstein with regard to culture as the gene solution for adaptation. And, I tend to view particularly the biblical narrative as almost a set of software. It's an upgrade to early man with regard to overriding certain biological impulses that can take us no further in order to benefit. A lot of that in early Genesis is, certain lessons around overriding some of the biological impulse for a longer game. So I don't really focus on the unanswerable questions anymore. I spent like 20, 30 years like chasing those questions and they don't have any answers, but the answer of how to be is an achievable one iteratively. And I think that the frameworks that kind of built the West, whether you're talking about Greco-Roman philosophy, Judeo-Christian ethic, Magna Carta, British common law, etc., these are stacked ideas that had to have their predecessor as a precursor, as a prerequisite for their being. And so this is kind of a pyramid that's been built up. And in the West, we have built this thing through this iteration of ideas, and America is built on ideas, not an ethno-state, not a bloodline. It's essentially a nation built on ideas, and in our abundance, we're now giving it away, which is what happens when societies reach abundance.
And I think that's a good line to kind of redirect into the book, so we can ask Jesse some questions about how all this is happening. I mean, I think there are responses to a lot of that. Like in one line, there's a Muslim traveler named Ibn Khaldun, and probably mispronounced his name, but he's talking about how he was traveling in West Africa, which was civilized but not very religious by his standards. And people kept asking him things like, "Oh, we've captured these men from the tribe that attacked us in the night. Why don't we eat them or sell them as slaves?" And his response was just because God says no. And I think that is to some extent where religious morality comes from. If you're trying to civilize people in very large communities, whether or not this comes down from the Most High, you need rules. Why should people who are themselves aggressive, skilled warriors and so on obey those rules? Well, because God says so. It's a very simple way of getting people that are moving out of barbarism to obey, to follow. Now, the one point religious people make here that I think is quite good is we have assumed for the past 50 years that civilized people don't need this religious framework, right? So that if we got rid of the Christian underpinnings of social morality, people would just continue to not kill and so forth because it makes sense. I'm starting to think that's pretty debatable when you look at recent surges in crime, rates of abortion in society, and so on down the line. So again, religion, believing in something's probably good for most people. I'll just return to that note that the religions all directly contradict each other. But Jesse, in terms of one religion, Islam, your book is focused on how the West is competing with this opposing or even enemy philosophy. And I know the answer having read the book, but how would you summarize for the audience how the competition's taking place? Like, are there really wealthy Arab countries trying to promote certain ideas throughout the world, or is that just sort of a conspiracy theory?
I think to tie it in with the religious discussion, if somebody lacks a moral compass, they're easily overtaken by somebody who does have a moral compass. And the reality is that the jihadists have a very different set of morals, as we've discussed on several levels. And I think the philosophy that the Judeo-Christian culture has of love everybody is a little bit different than kill your daughter if she dishonors the family. And so when we see the breakdown of those morals, when we see the breakdown of purpose, because it comes back to that too. When people know in their heart that God created them with purpose, on purpose, for a purpose, that they have skills that were God-given that they can use in this world to do something good, they're not going to be marching with some jihadists looking to feel better about themselves and having a circle jerk among their friends saying, oh yeah, look at me changing my profile picture to the Palestinian flag today. And it's really, I think when you have those values, it gives you a much better grounding in life. And I'm a Christian. I've seen just too much in my own life that can't be explained in any other way but miracles. And I've heard so many other people too that it's, and that's what I believe. And there are other ideologies certainly that have tremendous values that are very similar to that of the Christian philosophy. But the jihadists, they subscribe to fundamentalist Islam. And that's what's so ridiculous, is that whenever we talk about the religion, like you mentioned before, is I think Brooks, you were mentioning it, or somebody said, oh, you're a bigot now. And if you question it, it's the only people that are calling us Islamophobes and bigots. They're usually atheist liberals that don't have a clue about these people. When you go up to a fundamentalist Muslim and you say, hey, what do the jihadists believe? It's like, okay, this is they're following true Islam. I mean, there's no question in my mind that every jihadist that I've met absolutely believes that they are doing it on behalf of Allah, and that they're following some God-given commandment to go out and wage jihad against the infidels. And so and for people to say, oh, but jihad, they're misinterpreting, it means struggle or something like that. I mean, it means struggle as much as gay means happy nowadays. I mean, they know what they're doing. The only people, as I mentioned, that are saying anything otherwise are not the jihadists. And so every one of them says it's the religion that's driving them. There was a pamphlet in one of the documents that I transferred over to the Afghans that was found among locals that was being distributed. It was from the Taliban, and it said, I'm paraphrasing, it said, it is the duty of every Muslim to wage jihad against the infidels. And it had several Quran quotes in it that were like, look, you need to do this. This is your duty as a Muslim. And this is really what they believe. I remember on a related note, there was you talked about how Christie's uncovered there. That's so shameful. There was a woman. There was an Afghan singing competition early on in the war. I don't know. They made a documentary about this called Afghan Star, I think was the name of it. She went on the television. And she started to sing, and she even started to dance a little bit, and her hijab slipped a little bit, and she was dancing. And they did a man on the street interview. What do you think about this woman and what happened? And across the board, people on the street were saying, yeah, she should be killed. Yeah, execute her. That's shameful. Kill her. And these are just average Afghans that they're meeting in Kabul. These aren't even in rural villages. And it's just this different mindset in society. I remember an imam that I remember watching an interview with him where he said, women who don't cover themselves are like uncovered meat. And it's like, it's just totally, there's no freedom for women there. And so you see these, if these feminist or women's rights groups knew who they were cozying up to, they might have a different belief, but it's born in ignorance. I think that's why it's so important to teach our kids. We've got to focus. If we have children, get them, sit down with them, teach them about what we're up against. I mean, my book is a pretty easy read. If it takes 1,000 years, it's on Amazon. It's actually just we sold the rights to an audiobook, so it's going to come out in September, and you can pre-order now the audiobook of it. So the guy, there's a professional voice actor recording it, so it would be much better, or will be much better than I would be recording it. So
I just pre-ordered it, by the way. So
oh, awesome! Thank you.
Go out and
So
do
you're
that,
the
everybody.
one.
Yeah,
It's a good book. Everyone should definitely buy the book. I don't know, Jesse. I mean, you got a pretty sweet dulcet voice, so I don't know if any voice actor is going to really replace you in my heart. But you know.
Thank you, thank you.
Actually, like the voice actor who
kids.
did my
Mhm.
book is apparently better known than I am. It's like a similar British name. It's like Wilford something. And when I recorded, or when he recorded Taboo, people started contacting me, like mostly women, kind of amusingly, and saying things like, "Oh, I love your voice. You know, you're such an upper class." And I have kind of a Chicago accent. I was like, "What? You know, what's going on here?" Well, you must be great with accents. And I realized that this man had done every edition of my book, which probably made me like, you know, X amount. So good for him. Shout out to the voice actor on Taboo. That's all I
Nice.
got.
Jesse, I
Yeah.
did have a
Mhm.
question.
Sure.
So I know when we left Afghanistan, the knock was that the women were doing better when we were there, that they were actually gaining rights. And then as soon as we left, you watch CNN and they just, everything went to pot. So from your experience, did we make an impact on the culture and the lives of women when we were there in mass? And is there a reason for, our troops to be there? Like, is your book kind of like an argument maybe that, the liberals have it right and we need to be in this forever endless war and be there?
Well, I think the seed has been planted. That people now have seen there's another way. It definitely made an impact, I think, on the culture. But the reality is that we did it wrong. I mean, I don't think that it should be our foreign policy to go there and do nation building. It's something in any country for that matter. I think it's, if somebody is threatening us, you bomb the targets, you carry out raids, you capture the bad guys, and that's it. You don't go in and set up a bogus government and teach them, oh, here's our constitution, go ahead and run with it, because that's what we tried doing in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I'll give you an example of where they were at. This was 2012, so this is a decade into the conflict, and we captured, the coalition forces captured a Taliban fighter, brought him in, and I was usually I would get to talk to them pretty quickly after, like, CIA or somebody else would interrogate them. So they would come in to there was a freshly captured guy, and the guy that was turning him over was laughing. He was with the capturing unit, and he said during the initial interrogation, he stopped the translator in the mid sentence. The Taliban guy did, and said, "What's that stick in your hand?" And while the guy was taking notes, he had never seen a pen before in his life, and
Wow.
so I'm like, wow. So 10 years into this, there's still people that have never seen a pen before in their life. And these are the people that we're trying to teach Western democratic Republican style of governance. I'll give you another example too of where they're at culturally. There are many tribes in Afghanistan, and I think tribalism is something that is a foreign concept to people in not just America, but in Europe and the West in general. And humans are tribal by nature. We have our Republican tribe and our Democrat tribe and our whatever. Everybody gets in their little cliques, and they want to feel comfortable, because that's really where we came from. I mean, historically, evolutionarily, I mean, we were in tribes back in the day, and so we still have that element, but it's on steroids in the Islamic world. There's a tribe, the Nuristani tribe in Afghanistan, where they have different villages. The tribes are separated in their own villages, and to be the equivalent of our city council member in the Nuristani villages, to be a village leader, you have prerequisites, 3 of them. You have to be a good speaker, you have to entertain the village at a banquet 10 times, and you have to murder 5 rival tribe members. And so it's It's like, okay, you still have that, and it's like MS-13 is the same way. You have to murder murder a member of a rival gang or rival tribe, and so evil exists. Evil is real. It's out there. They're different mindsets, and the liberal cat lady that's living in San Francisco, when she goes to vote and she's voting to support these types, the people that would open the door for these people, she has no idea what they're thinking, how those people really are, and that we really do have genuine enemies out there. And back to the point, I digressed a little bit of a nation building and staying there. I think the only thing that benefits from that is the military industrial complex. It was so clear that we had no reason to stay there, that it was all fake other than to continue to spend contracts. And every member of Congress had their own little contractor or pet project that would, oh, give us a little bit more. And you've got heavy influence from lobbyist groups, from the contractors like KBR or Halliburton, or Fluor was in charge when I was there. But Halliburton had a tremendous amount of contracts in Iraq. And who was their former CEO? Brooks, I'll bet you know.
Yeah. The guy who in 1996, when he was asked, why didn't we go all the way and take out Saddam? He said, well, if we take out Saddam, what are we going to replace it with? You would have an insurgency. It would turn into a quagmire. And so, no, that's why we didn't. And because I didn't have corporate interest to be made for the next 20 years, we decided not to do it. Something like that.
The second part of that is absolutely brutal. But the first part does get into a real question. Like, Jesse, when you were describing, how you become a clan chief in this hill tribe in Afghanistan, I mean, I do think the immediate modern American reaction is, well, that's evil, that's primitive. But in fact, that's just savagery. That's one of the three states of man: savagery, barbarism, civilization. Like, if you read about the Iroquois in the USA, I'm black, white, native, I have some interest in native history. That's what they did. You were considered unsuitable for marriage unless you'd built a house and killed an enemy. And there's not even really anything dishonorable about that under those conditions. Like, you've got a bunch of people that raid you, try to kill you. You stop them in the woods, you kill a few of them, you put feathers in your hair, and now you can get married. So the question that comes from that, I think, is we have people that are existing almost at different levels of historical development around the world. Like, if you're in the United States in a Mile Spire building in New York, or for that matter, Cleveland, and you go to Latin America, you'll see something different. But if you go to Afghanistan or Congo, you'll see something real different, which probably looks a lot like what humanity did for almost all of history. There are very few life roles you can play, wife, peasant, fighting man, so on. So I think when you talk about, like, Jesse, you just said U.S. nation building in Afghanistan didn't make sense. I agree. The broader question, I think, is any of this real? Like, when Obama and Bush started interfering in these stable Arab countries like Libya, Egypt, so on, and they would knock out basically the strong king, someone from a major family who'd been technically elected, countries that were second world stable countries all went to shit immediately. I mean, democracy produced the election of the Islamist party in every case. So other than fighting for basic stability, is there anything we should be doing in these countries other than trade? Like, if they say we prefer a king, should we feel some kind of obligation to topple the king, knowing that that'll probably just lead to tribal chaos, which is what you had before kings?
Well, I think there's two problems. Number one is, in the West, we don't understand the mindset. At least we didn't. I think we're starting to, now that we have a more open internet, that we see things instantly. We start to see that these other things exist. Whereas before, if it wasn't on CNN or on the front page of the Sunday newspaper, we really didn't know what was going on in the world. And now we see everything all at once, which is a bit like drinking from a fire hose. So it's a lot of static, but you've got enough people now that are filtering through the static, and they're usually the people at the top echelons of Western society are privy to, and they're paying more attention than the average person who's watching Desperate Housewives or whatever the show of the day is. As far as a king or strongman is concerned, the takeaway from my book, as far as some of the solutions, because the first third of the book talks about how they think It's more, then it goes into it's their mindset. Then it goes into how to defeat them. And the latter third is really what some ideas for solutions. And if we do ever have to go to war with these types of nations and knock somebody out, because that will happen, there's no question. There will be people who try to expand their influence beyond their borders and come into our neck of the woods and start to fight us. And so when that happens, the only solution is another strongman. And the policymakers need to get more educated on that kind of stuff. Is that, like, for example, in Iraq, the Ba'ath Party was socialist. This was not a religious party. It was a very, very just authoritarian party. And by taking the lid off the pot, we allowed all these Wahhabist extremist elements to move in and start indoctrinating kids in Islamic schools, and so then you saw the rise of ISIS and other things come out of that. And whereas before they were not Islamists, these were, the Ba'ath Party had other brutal generals that we could have put in charge instead of Saddam Hussein, if we were to go in there at all. But and you can look at in Syria too with Assad. This is another member of the Ba'ath Party, and it's albeit the Shia version. It's somebody who we short-sightedly looked at our short-term interests, which is really to counter Russia and Iran, and we didn't want him cozying up to Russia. So we gotta get rid of him. We gotta get rid of him, and now we're not noticing that Turkey is becoming more and more authoritarian in that region and gaining more power, and they are turning into more of an Islamist theocracy. And so it's the long-term consequences of knocking out strongmen. I hope that we're starting to realize, I mean, granted this continues to happen, is very detrimental to stability in that part of the world. The only people that work, if you look at history, that work so far in those regions are strongmen. You look at Mubarak, was running the country in Egypt, albeit fairly brutally. He kept it together, and then we lift the pot and they elected the Muslim Brotherhood in Libya, in Algeria, and all these places. When they had so-called democratic elections, you see the Islamists take power. And it's a mix of maybe the majority of the society wanting to have an Islamist in power, or even if it's not the majority, they are so aggressive in their tactics that they will seize power. I'll give you an example. In Egypt, I talked to a priest who organized a bus of Christians to come from one of the more rural villages to vote in the referendum, and they were met by Muslim Brotherhood members with knives, and they're very clearly recognizable as members of the Muslim Brotherhood. They have beards. They have, although I've got a beard too, but they have a bruise on their forehead, which they get from banging their head on the ground during prayer. They do, in fact, they actually, some of them heat up. They're known to heat up a spoon in the fire and place it on their forehead to accentuate the bruise.
So pious.
And yeah, so it's like they're look at me, and but it's a way to identify them, and so that way when somebody tries to vote that doesn't have the bruise or a beard, they say no, go away, and they threaten them. So that whole bus did not get to vote in that election, according to the priest that I talked to, and it's very serious. I mean, they will act violently. There was a church that I visited in Alexandria where a priest was stabbed during the middle of the service, and that church actually later on, just a few months after I left, was where there was a suicide bombing at a midnight mass that killed dozens of people. And it's the threat is real. The Christians and non-Muslims in that part of the region do live under it and understand it. And the only thing that's going to stop that kind of sectarian violence is a strong man that says you will get along, and we need to understand that.
And this goes back to what you were
about at the Brooks. What do you say?
Yeah, quick comment. When you were talking about earlier about the naivete, and I fell for this, right? When I went over after 9/11, when we were going to Iraq, it's like, we're going to go liberate them, and we're going to hand them a thumb drive that's got Jeffersonian republicanism, and they're going to adopt it, and they're going to be free. And unless they have organically built this system of ideas the way that we have, and I think there's a quote from an Iraqi official, and you might feature it. It's, in the Middle East, democracy is used as a streetcar to pick the next Islamic dictator. I mean, that's the only purpose for that's the only outcome democracy has over there, because they don't have the basic tenets to be, what would you say, trusted with it. So yeah, the strongman is the only stable solution over there.
They have to reach that level of thought. And I would like to end on a quick optimistic note. I think the game changer is the internet. I think the fact that we're all now connected, you have those people in Afghanistan, that guy that didn't know what a pen was 10 years ago probably has a smartphone in his hand now. And the fact that they see that there are other ideologies, that there are other ways out there, I think we can play the long-term game too, and start to reach out to them in those ways and try to bring them into the modern mindset with a different ideology. And I believe that's Christianity.
Oh, all right. So Jesse, actually, you kind of broke the cycle there. I was going to go around and ask everyone for their last thoughts and close the deal at the end, but I guess we'll just do it in reverse. I'll go first. I think there's a lot of truth to that. The basic idea is whether you can develop other people to be what you are and what your society is. And Jesse, your idea that modern tech might be the way to do that's fascinating. I actually haven't heard that mentioned very much in the academy for some weird reason. But yeah, you've now got every philosophy from around the world available in your hand in all the major languages, including English and Arabic. I'll actually close with the less optimistic note. I hope we convince them of the intelligent sort of Roman and Christian-based version of our philosophy, rather than vice versa. People on the internet being able to see the Chinese Communist Party's propaganda, the propaganda from the most sophisticated Arab regimes. Like Qatar is openly funding a lot of conservative and centrist pundits. I mean, I'm sure Israel is too, and so on. But this is something that's come to light in recent days. But I hope that our ideas will be the ideas that prevail. I think they will. Brooks Crenshaw, what do you have to say? What's your final note on if it takes 1,000 years?
Yeah, I first of all, Jesse, thanks for writing the book. I think it's a great tool in the hands of people that do not understand the problem. Most people in the U.S. haven't seen outside the castle walls aside from U.S. vacation spots, right? So understanding what's out there and understanding the duplicity, particularly taqiyya, with regard to, I mean, it's a fundamental tenet of their religion.
What is taqiyya for those listening that don't know? That's something we should have touched on.
So they have a duty to deceive as needed for the cause. So, when they cozy up, to Jesse, any of those guys that cozied up to him, that's all well and good. But at the right moment, if it served their purpose, they would absolutely kill him if they could.
Right.
So yeah, taqiyya is essentially lie for God, something to that effect, and it is used in a very sophisticated manner for such an unsophisticated group of people.
They're unsophisticated at building hydroelectric dams. They're probably very sophisticated at backstabbing military conflict by this point in tribal history.
They're sophisticated at moving water in a primitive fashion. I'll tell you that. Some of the engineers that I was running security for in Afghanistan, like some of the farmers out there were, moving water uphill with essentially a shovel. So yeah, they have some old school knowledge with regard to that. But yeah, that's aside.
Fair enough. That's fascinating, actually. But Christy Kelly, last word to you. What do you think about if it takes 1,000 years and the Western response?
Yeah, I think, even with seeing all the encampments on university campuses, I think, we just kind of roll our eyes at it and like, oh, the left. But I do like this book and the idea that, Jesse, you brought it back to parents. And it's like, it's our job not to let the next generation get sucked into this. Because I guarantee you, on my top 10 things to do as a mom of a, 16, 19, and then an adult, this has never crossed my mind to discuss. Even I'm sending them off to college, never crossed my mind to discuss because they would never, right? But it just shows you how easy they can be duped into, thinking about these things. So thank you for writing the book, and I look forward to getting the audiobook and sharing it, at least with my three.
Thank you.
That sounds good. Great summary from Christy. Teach your kids the values of our society because other societies are going to do that with their children. All right. Thanks to everyone. Jesse, thank you for coming on the program, and thank you for writing the book.
Thank you very much.
I got a country to say. Patriot J, I'm saving the day. Patriot J, I'm saving the day from you commies who lame. No, you can't fuck with me. I got a country to say. God bless the US of A. Land of the free and a home of the brave. God get all of the praise. I got a country to say, cause I'm Patriot J and I'm saving the day.